No one inside the training hall believed what they were seeing. Chuck Norris stood at the center of the room, calm, legendary, unshaken. A man whose name alone had ended arguments, fights, even careers. Decades of dominance, countless stories, myths that blurred the line between reality and legend. People whispered his name with a mix of respect and fear. To most in that room, Chuck Norris wasn't just a fighter, he was the standard. Then the door opened. No dramatic music, no loud entrance, no entourage. Just Michael Jai White, tall, solid, focused, wearing plain training gear. His face showed no arrogance, no challenge, no desire to prove anything. He walked in like a man who already knew who he was and didn't need permission from anyone else. The room reacted instantly. Some smirked. Some laughed quietly. Others shook their heads. Is he serious? Against Chuck? This won't last long. Michael stopped a few steps away from Chuck Norris. He didn't bow. He didn't stare him down either. He simply stood there, relaxed, balanced, breathing slow. Fighters in the room noticed it immediately. Casual fans didn't. But the professionals felt something shift. Chuck looked at him, not with anger, not with ego, but with curiosity. For a moment, neither man spoke. That silence felt heavier than any trash talk. The instructor cleared his throat, trying to lighten the mood. Just a friendly session, he said. But his voice cracked slightly. Even he knew this wasn't just friendly. 2 generations, 2 philosophies, 2 forces that rarely crossed paths. Michael finally spoke, calm, respectful, controlled. I've learned a lot from watching you. Chuck nodded slowly. Then let's see what you've learned. That's when the room changed. Phones quietly came out, conversations stopped mid-sentence. Even people who had trained for years felt their palms sweat. This wasn't about ego anymore. This wasn't about winning. This was about something unspoken. Legacy versus evolution. Myth versus mastery. Noise versus silence. No bell rang. No announcer shouted, but everyone knew. The moment Michael Jai White took his stance across from Chuck Norris, something unforgettable was about to happen. And when it ended, no one in that room would ever speak the same way about strength again. The training hall wasn't some flashy arena or television set. It was quiet, practical, and worn down by years of real work. The kind of place where sweat had soaked into the mats and respect was earned, not demanded. On the walls hung old photographs. Champions frozen in time. Black belts standing proudly beside instructors who had long since retired. This was a room built on discipline, not drama. Chuck Norris moved through it like he belonged there. Because he did. Every step he took was steady, unhurried. He didn't stretch to impress anyone. He didn't talk. Fighters nearby subtly adjusted their posture the moment he passed. Some nodded. Some stayed completely still. Everyone knew better than to treat his presence lightly. For them, Chuck Norris represented an era where fighters didn't chase fame. Fame chased them. Across the room, Michael Jai White observed quietly. He didn't scan the crowd. He didn't measure himself against anyone else. He focused on the space, the floor, the distance, the energy. People often misunderstood calmness for hesitation. But seasoned fighters knew better. Calm was control. Calm meant nothing inside was shaking. Michael adjusted his stance slightly, testing his balance, feeling the mat beneath his feet. His breathing was slow and measured. A rhythm learned through years of discipline across multiple fighting styles. Whispers rippled through the room. That's Michael Jai White, right? He's a movie fighter. Yeah, but he's legit. Others weren't convinced. To them, this felt like a mismatch in spirit. Chuck Norris wasn't just a fighter. He was history, a living symbol of dominance. Michael, in their eyes, was stepping into sacred ground. But Michael didn't see it that way. To him, this wasn't about challenging a legend. It was about standing in truth. Fighters didn't grow by avoiding greatness. They grew by facing it respectfully, fully, without excuses. Chuck finally stopped at the center of the mat. The room quieted instinctively. He rolled his shoulders once, then looked toward Michael again. There was no intimidation in his eyes, only awareness. Chuck had spent his life reading opponents before they moved. He noticed Michael's posture, his relaxed shoulders, his grounded stance. This wasn't someone pretending. This was someone prepared. "You train a lot," Chuck said, breaking the silence. "Every day," Michael replied. "Same as you did." That answer earned a few raised eyebrows, not because it was disrespectful, but because it was honest. The instructor hesitated, then gestured them closer. "Keep it clean," he said. "This is about learning." But deep down, everyone knew learning wasn't the only thing about to happen. The air felt heavier now. Time slowed. The distance between the two men seemed smaller than it actually was. Michael stepped forward, not aggressively, just enough to close the space. Chuck mirrored him naturally, as if drawn by instinct. Two warriors. No trash talk, no applause, just quiet recognition. This wasn't a movie scene. This wasn't about age or fame. This was about what happens when discipline meets discipline, and neither side looks away. And somewhere in that stillness, the real test was about to begin. The moment they squared up, the air in the training hall changed. It wasn't loud. It wasn't chaotic. It was tense. The kind of tension only fighters recognize. The kind that crawls under the skin and tightens the jaw without anyone saying a word. Chuck Norris adjusted his stance first. Not rushed, not dramatic, just enough to signal readiness. His feet settled into position, weight balanced perfectly, decades of muscle memory guiding every inch. To the untrained eye, he looked relaxed. To the professionals watching, he looked dangerous. Michael Jai White noticed everything. He didn't mirror Chuck. He didn't copy. He simply became still, too still. His shoulders dropped slightly. His hands rose. Not high, not low, placed with intention. His posture wasn't aggressive. It was efficient. This wasn't a man looking for applause. This was a man preparing for reality. A few people in the room exchanged glances. "This is serious," someone whispered. The instructor raised his hand, hesitated for a brief second, then lowered it. There was no bell, no signal. The understanding between the two men was enough. Chuck took the first step. It was subtle. A test. A shift of weight meant to read reaction, not land a strike. Many opponents would flinch, many would overreact. Michael didn't do either. His feet adjusted by inches, his balance never breaking, his eyes never leaving Chuck's center line. Chuck paused. That pause said more than words ever could. Somewhere in the crowd, a smirk faded. Chuck stepped again, closer this time. His movement was smooth, controlled, carrying the quiet authority of someone who had ended countless fights before they began. A feint followed. Quick, sharp, designed to expose hesitation. Michael moved, not backward, not forward. He moved around it. Clean, efficient. Almost casual. The room inhaled as one. That was training. Chuck's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes sharpened. He reset his stance slightly, acknowledging what just happened without acknowledging it out loud. Respect among warriors was rarely verbal. The next exchange came faster. Chuck advanced with a controlled combination. Nothing reckless, nothing wild, just enough pressure to test timing and distance. Michael responded with minimal movement, deflecting instead of blocking, conserving energy, reading rhythm. Every exchange was quiet. No grunts. No shouting. Only footwork brushing against the mat and the soft thud of controlled contact. Spectators leaned forward unconsciously. Phones were forgotten. No one wanted to blink. Chuck changed tempo. A sudden burst forward, faster than anyone expected. This time Michael didn't evade. He met it. Their arms collided in a brief, explosive moment of contact. Strength meeting strength. The impact wasn't violent, but it was undeniable. Two bodies, both conditioned, both unyielding. For a split second, neither moved. Then Michael shifted his weight and disengaged smoothly, stepping back into position like nothing had happened. The silence afterward was deafening. That single moment erased every doubt in the room. No one laughed now. No one whispered. They were witnessing something rare. Not a fight fueled by ego, but a conflict fueled by understanding. Chuck exhaled slowly. A faint smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "You're grounded," he said quietly. Michael nodded once. "So are you." That exchange carried more weight than any insult ever could. Chuck circled now, measuring angles, adjusting pace. Michael tracked him calmly, never chasing, never retreating too far. Their movements were a conversation, question and answer, pressure and response. But beneath that control, the conflict was clear. Not about who was stronger, not about who was faster. It was about identity. The legend who built the foundation, the warrior who evolved beyond it. Each step forward from Chuck tested legacy. Each calm response from Michael tested assumption. And as the seconds passed, something uncomfortable settled over the room. This wasn't going the way anyone expected. No one was dominating. No one was backing down. Two masters, two paths, locked in a moment where arrogance had no place, and silence had begun to speak louder than power. Whatever happened next, it wouldn't end with a roar. It would end with realization. The room had gone completely still. Not the kind of silence that comes from fear, but the kind that comes from awareness. Every person inside the training hall felt it at the same time. Something important was unfolding, and no one wanted to interrupt it with noise, movement, or breath. Chuck Norris slowed his pace. Not because he was tired, not because he was unsure, but because he was thinking. Years of experience had taught him when to press forward, and when to listen. His eyes studied Michael Jai White carefully now, no longer as a challenger, but as an equal presence. Every detail mattered. The angle of Michael's shoulders, the placement of his feet, the calm rise and fall of his chest. Michael stood relaxed. Too relaxed for a man facing a legend. His hands weren't shaking. His jaw wasn't clenched. His eyes weren't darting around the room. He wasn't waiting for permission to act, and he wasn't rushing to make a statement. He simply existed in the moment, balanced, ready, grounded. The spectators barely moved. Someone in the back lowered their phone. Another crossed their arms slowly, as if afraid sudden motion might break whatever spell had settled over the space. Even the instructor remained frozen, his earlier authority replaced by quiet observation. Chuck shifted again, a small pivot of the foot. Michael responded instantly, adjusting his distance by inches. No wasted motion, no hesitation. It was like watching two clocks ticking at the same speed. Chuck launched a controlled strike. Not full power, not careless. It was precise, meant to test reaction time rather than cause damage. Michael deflected it smoothly, redirecting the energy instead of absorbing it. Their arms brushed, muscles tensed, then separated. The sound was barely audible, but everyone felt it. A few observers exchanged looks that said everything words couldn't. This is real. Chuck followed with another movement. Michael read it and shifted his stance, staying just outside reach. The distance between them felt deliberate, measured, intentional. They weren't just fighting each other. They were respecting the space between them. Time seemed to stretch. Seconds felt longer. Breaths felt heavier. Chuck paused again, standing tall, shoulders relaxed. His face showed no frustration, no urgency, only focus. He had spent his life mastering control, and now he was meeting someone who spoke the same language. Michael met his gaze without challenge. There was no stare, down, no attempt to dominate, just acknowledgement. Then Chuck moved forward decisively. Michael didn't step back. Their movements collided in a brief, powerful exchange, arms crossing, shoulders brushing, balance shifting. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't cinematic. It was pure technique meeting pure discipline. For a heartbeat, both men locked in place. Strength pressed against structure. Pressure tested posture. Neither gave an inch. Then, almost simultaneously, they disengaged. Michael stepped back first, smooth and controlled. Chuck followed a half-second later, resetting his stance. Both men remained upright, calm, unbroken. The room released a collective breath it didn't realize it was holding. No cheers followed, no clapping, just stunned silence. That silence carried weight, because everyone now understood something important. This wasn't about proving superiority. This was about recognition. Chuck's expression softened slightly. He nodded. Not a dramatic gesture, but a subtle one. The kind only another seasoned fighter would notice. Michael returned the nod, equal, mutual, unspoken. Around them, the mood shifted completely. Where there had once been expectation of dominance, there was now humility. Where there had been whispers of mismatch, there was now respect. The clash hadn't ended with impact, it had ended with understanding. And that understanding was louder than any knockout. Whatever came next wouldn't be about testing limits anymore. It would be about acknowledging them. Because in that moment of shared stillness, both men had proven something far more powerful than victory. They had proven that true mastery doesn't shout. It stands quietly and lets the world catch up. The silence didn't break all at once. It cracked slowly, like ice under pressure. A low murmur spread through the training hall, not from excitement, but from realization. People weren't whispering who was winning anymore. They were whispering what they were witnessing. Something deeper than competition had surfaced, and everyone could feel it. Chuck Norris straightened his posture and stepped back half a pace. That single movement spoke volumes. It wasn't retreat. It wasn't hesitation. It was acknowledgement. Michael Jai White remained still, hands relaxed, eyes calm. He didn't chase the moment, he didn't capitalize on it. Fighters driven by ego would have pressed forward, tried to dominate the exchange, tried to leave a mark. Michael did none of that. And that restraint changed everything. Chuck studied him carefully now. Not as a legend being tested, but as a craftsman observing another craftsman's work. His breathing slowed even more. His shoulders dropped. The tension that had once fueled the room transformed into something else entirely: respect. "You don't rush," Chuck said quietly. Michael gave a slight nod. "Rushing creates mistakes." A few heads in the crowd lifted at that exchange. It wasn't trash talk. It wasn't defiance. It was shared understanding, the kind that only comes from years of discipline and pain. Chuck circled again, but this time with less pressure and more curiosity. He shifted angles, changed rhythm, tested timing. And each time, Michael adjusted seamlessly. Not copying, not reacting late, reading intent before movement. The room was watching a conversation unfold without words. Chuck suddenly stepped in, not aggressively, but decisively. And Michael responded instantly, matching him beat for beat. Their movements mirrored each other briefly, like reflections passing in motion. No one struck, no one tried to dominate. They stopped at the same time. That moment hit harder than any blow could have. Chuck exhaled and lowered his hands slightly. "I see it now," he said. Michael didn't respond immediately. He simply waited, not out of caution, but out of respect. Chuck had earned that space. "You're not here to prove anything," Chuck continued. "You're here because this is who you are." Michael finally spoke. "I learned that from watching people like you." That line landed quietly, but it landed deep. The instructor shifted his weight, unsure whether to step in or step back. He chose the latter. This wasn't his moment to control. Chuck took another step back, then another. The message was clear. The crowd didn't erupt. There was no sudden applause. Everyone understood that clapping would cheapen what they were seeing. This wasn't entertainment. It was recognition between two masters standing on opposite sides of time. Chuck extended his hand, not in surrender, not in defeat, in respect. Michael looked at it for a brief second, then reached out and shook it firmly. No exaggerated gesture, no forced smile. Just two warriors acknowledging each other without ego. That handshake did something powerful. It shifted the entire narrative. People who had walked in expecting dominance now stood witnessing humility. Those who had come to watch a legend assert control were instead learning what true strength actually looked like. Chuck turned slightly toward the room. "Pay attention," he said calmly. "This is how discipline looks when it matures." No one spoke, no one needed to. Michael stepped back into a neutral stance, giving Chuck the space to move freely. Chuck nodded once more, his expression calm, grounded, complete. There was nothing left to prove. The conflict hadn't ended with a winner, it had ended with truth, and that truth sat heavy in the room. Quiet, undeniable, unforgettable. The moment passed, but the weight of it remained. Chuck Norris slowly released Michael Jai White's hand and took a step back, not to create distance, but to give space. The kind of space that follows understanding, not conflict, the kind that doesn't need explanation. The room stayed quiet, not because people were unsure what to do, but because everyone knew this wasn't a moment to interrupt. Chuck turned slightly toward the instructor, then toward the onlookers. His posture was relaxed now, almost reflective. Gone was the testing pressure, the sharp edge of evaluation. What stood in its place was calm clarity. "This," Chuck said, gesturing subtly between himself and Michael, "is what people don't talk about." He paused, letting the words settle. They talk about victories, about titles, about who beat who. His eyes moved briefly across the room. "But this is what lasts." Michael listened without shifting his stance. He wasn't seeking validation. He wasn't absorbing praise. He was present, grounded in the moment, exactly where a disciplined fighter should be. Chuck continued, his voice steady. "A real warrior doesn't measure himself by the people he dominates, but by the people who challenge him without ego." A few heads lowered instinctively. Some people felt those words land closer to home than expected. Chuck turned back to Michael. "You carry yourself the right way," he said. "That matters more than power." Michael inclined his head slightly. "I try to remember why I started." That simple sentence carried years of meaning. Chuck smiled. Not the confident grin of a public figure, but the quiet smile of someone who recognized sincerity. Most people forget that part. The instructor finally stepped forward, unsure whether he was allowed to speak. Chuck waved him in gently. "Let them reset the room," he said. "No more watching everyone trains." It was an instruction, not a command. The spectators began to move again, slowly at first, as if waking from a deep focus. Conversations restarted. But they were different now. Softer, thoughtful. No one joked. No one boasted. Something in the atmosphere had shifted permanently. Michael walked toward the edge of the mat, giving space without drawing attention. He picked up his towel, wiped his face calmly, and took a sip of water. Anyone watching closely could see the same composure he'd had from the beginning. No celebration, no display. Chuck watched him for a moment longer. Then he addressed the room one final time. "Remember what you saw today," he said. "Not the techniques, not the names." He paused. "Remember the restraint." That word echoed quietly in the hall. Michael returned to the mat and stood beside Chuck, not in front of him, not behind him. Beside him, the symbolism wasn't on anyone, two paths, different eras. Same discipline. No one declared a winner. Because there wasn't one. What there was instead was resolution. The conflict had begun with uncertainty, with expectations and assumptions. It had grown through tension and silence. And now it settled into something deeper, understanding without comparison. Chuck extended his hand again, this time pulling Michael slightly closer. "Keep teaching the right way," he said quietly. Michael nodded. "Always." That was it. No announcement. No encore. No noise. Chuck stepped off the mat first. Not as an exit, but as a closing gesture. Michael followed moments later. The training hall slowly returned to its routine. But the people inside knew the routine would never feel the same. They hadn't witnessed a fight. They had witnessed a standard. A reminder that true mastery doesn't seek attention. It leaves an impression and walks away. Long after Chuck Norris and Michael Jai White left the training hall, the silence they created stayed behind. People continued to train. Pads were hit. Feet moved across the mats. Commands were given. From the outside, everything looked normal again. But inside the minds of those who had witnessed that moment, something fundamental had shifted. They weren't replaying techniques. They weren't arguing over who would win. They were thinking about why it unfolded the way it did. In a world obsessed with noise, that moment had been quiet. In a culture that celebrates domination, that moment had chosen restraint. And that contrast lingered. One of the younger fighters paused mid-drill and looked toward the center of the mat where the two men had stood. There was no mark left behind, no dent in the floor, no sign that anything historic had happened there at all. And yet, it felt heavier than any trophy room. Because real power doesn't leave scars. It leaves understanding. Chuck Norris had walked in as a legend, a name carved into history. Michael Jai White had stepped forward not to challenge that history, but to stand honestly within it. Neither tried to rewrite the past. Neither tried to claim the future. They simply met in the present. And that is where true strength lives. Most people think respect is earned through volume, through proving, posturing, winning loudly. But what unfolded that day showed a different truth. Respect is earned through consistency, through discipline when no one is watching, through knowing when not to strike. The fighters who watched that exchange learned something deeper than any technique. They learned that ego ages poorly, but humility matures like fine steel. Chuck didn't need to dominate to remind the room who he was. Michael didn't need to impress to prove his worth. Their silence spoke because it was backed by years of work, unseen mornings, lonely training sessions, mistakes corrected quietly. That is why the ending left everyone silent. Not because they were shocked, but because they were taught. Taught that legacy isn't defended by force. Taught that evolution doesn't disrespect foundation. Taught that mastery doesn't shout, it nods. Some moments entertain, others inspire. But once in a while, a moment educates without saying a word. That day, two warriors from different generations showed what it looks like when strength meets strength, and chooses respect instead of dominance. And the people who saw it, they carried it with them, into their training, into their teaching, into their lives, because the real lesson wasn't about fighting. It was about how to stand calm, grounded, and unafraid, even when facing a legend. And maybe that's why no one clapped. Maybe that's why no one spoke. Some truths don't need applause, they just need to be witnessed.